to Perth. We're joined by the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann. Minister, thank you for your time. You're there at the WA Liberal State Conference meeting, and there are plenty of issues to discuss around that meeting as well. But let's start on this proposal from Labor to launch a parliamentary inquiry into the abuse allegations on Nauru. Will the government be supporting that?
Well, I'll let Peter Dutton, as the Minister responsible, deal with that particular proposal that Labor's put on the table. But what I would say is that many of the allegations that have been put forward, many of the claims that have been reported earlier this week are claims that are quite historical in nature, that have previously been investigated, that have been dealt with appropriately. The Department of Immigration and Border Protection, as I've been advised, is currently reviewing every single one of those documents that has been released in recent days to see whether there is any new claim. I mean, there are very strict processes and procedures within the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, and indeed the offshore protection framework, to deal with any allegations of abuse of this sort of nature, and appropriate action is always taken.
Let's move on to issues that are no doubt dominating your mind there in Western Australia. When it comes to Mr Turnbull's pledge yesterday to establish a floor price for GST distribution, where do you think negotiations will land on what that floor price should be?
Well, the Australian government has long been of the view that the share of the GST coming back to Western Australia is inappropriately low. It went as low as 30%, 30 cents for every dollar collected in GST in Western Australia is returned to Western Australia. And in the past 2 years, that is why the Australian government has made additional investments into West Australian infrastructure projects, making payments that effectively stopped the further drop in WA's share of the GST. Now, the reason that has happened, the reason there has been such a strong fall, is on the back of Western Australia's success, in particular in relation to the iron ore industry, with very high prices and increasing production volumes and export volumes of iron ore. The price of iron ore has come down quite significantly in recent years, and over time the WA share of the GST will start to increase again. And what the Prime Minister has announced yesterday is that once that happens, in order to ensure that what has happened to Western Australia this time round cannot happen to any other state in the future, it would be appropriate to set a floor. And that will be now a matter for discussion, of course, between the Prime Minister and the Premiers and Chief Ministers in the Council of Australian Government Forum.
Labor in WA is pushing for an 80-cent floor. Is that unrealistic, do you think?
I was listening into your interview with Bill Shorten, who was working very hard to avoid answering your question. I'm not going to lock into a specific number here today. It was a very important announcement by the Prime Minister yesterday to put on the table the fact that there needs to be a floor, that he will work to pursue a floor, and indeed the Australian government will now engage with all state and territory governments to ensure that that is done in the appropriate fashion.
OK, so we don't have any more details on what the floor price would be. Do you have any sort of range, though, as to what will be up for discussion?
Well, it's a matter of public record that, previously there has been a discussion at the Council of Australian Government to at least have a 50% floor initially. Premier Colin Barnett in Western Australia has advocated for a 75% floor. We are going into these conversations, with an open mind, but we do believe there needs to be a floor, that the gap between the share of GST that is going back to Western Australia and the share that is going to other states is too large. It's inappropriately large. It's unprecedented. It is true that Western Australia in the past has been a beneficiary of so-called horizontal fiscal equalisation, but no other state has ever fallen below 80 cents in the dollar when it comes to the returns going back into those respective states. And 30 cents is just completely inappropriate and unsustainable. And that is, of course, the reason why over the past 2 years the federal government has made additional contributions to Western Australia in recognition of that. But we need a more structural, a more sustainable, a more long-term solution, and that is what the Prime Minister has put on the table yesterday.
And how much of a priority is this for the government? What is a realistic timeline as to when we can actually expect a floor to be in place?
Obviously, what the Prime Minister has said is that the floor should be put in place, once Western Australia exceeds certain thresholds. I mean, because of what's been happening to the price of iron ore in recent years, and the GST sharing arrangements are backward-looking. It does take 3 years for changes in royalty revenues and the like to work their way through the system, so to speak. Over the next few years, it is expected that WA's share of the GST will increase again in the ordinary course of events under the current system. And as that happens, the proposal is to put in a floor at that time, which that means that no other state will actually be disadvantaged because no other state will lose compared to the projected GST shares that they will be receiving at that time.
Would you like to see your government reassess its position when it comes to the Racial Discrimination Act and 18C? Do you think that this is something that does need to be back on the table for the Liberal government to examine?
The government has got no plans to put this back on the table. This has been extensively debated. Obviously, in 2014, we are focused on implementing our plan for stronger growth and more jobs, and we're getting on with implementing all of the commitments that we took to the last election, and obviously this wasn't one of them.
Finance Minister Matthias Cormann, we appreciate your time. We'll let you get back to that conference, which is about to kick off for its second day. Thank you so much.
Always good to talk to you.